Some people lie. Some people stay silent. And then there are people who do something much stranger. They explain. Not once. Not briefly. But over and over, until every possible misunderstanding has been addressed before anyone even has the chance to misunderstand them. Someone asks a simple question. What time did you get home? And instead of saying around 7, the answer becomes a timeline. Well, traffic was heavier than I expected. I stopped for gas because the tank was almost empty. Then I remembered I still needed groceries. But the store was crowded, so that took longer than I thought. The original question disappeared several sentences ago. What's left is an attempt to make every detail understandable. At first glance, it seems harmless. Some people even describe it as being thorough, considerate, or simply a habit of talking too much. But that's where the contradiction begins. Because over-explaining usually isn't about explaining. It's about preventing something else. Judgment, misunderstanding, conflict, rejection, sometimes all of them at once. The explanation isn't really aimed at the situation. It's aimed at a possibility the speaker can already imagine. A possibility where someone assumes the worst, where motives are questioned, where intentions are doubted. So the mind begins building a defense before there's even an accusation. From the outside, it can sound excessive. From the inside, it often feels necessary. And that's what makes this behavior so difficult to notice. Many people who over-explain don't think they're anxious. They think they're being responsible. Reasonable, clear yet psychology suggests that behaviors aren't always defined by what they look like on the surface. Sometimes the visible habit is simply the strategy. The real story lives underneath it. Today isn't about why people talk too much. It's about why some people feel compelled to make themselves impossible to misunderstand. Because those aren't always the same thing. Most conversations rely on an invisible assumption that both people are willing to fill in small gaps. If someone says they're running late, most listeners don't immediately assume they're irresponsible. If someone forgets to reply, most people assume life simply got busy. Human interaction depends on this quiet generosity. We constantly leave pieces unsaid, and most of the time, nothing terrible happens. But not everyone experiences conversations this way. For some people, silence feels dangerous. A missing detail doesn't feel neutral. It feels risky. Instead of assuming they'll be understood, they assume they'll have to prove themselves. So explanations become longer, more detailed, more carefully constructed. Not because they enjoy explaining, but because uncertainty feels expensive. Psychologists sometimes describe this through the idea of negative interpretation bias, where people begin expecting ambiguous situations to end in criticism rather than understanding. When that expectation becomes familiar enough, the mind starts preparing for criticism before criticism even exists. The explanation becomes preventive, almost like emotional insurance. It's an interesting contradiction. The longer someone explains, the more confident they may appear to sound. But internally, confidence often isn't what's driving the behavior at all. Sometimes it's vigilance. One possibility comes from attachment research. Carl Rogers wrote extensively about what he called conditions of worth. The idea is surprisingly simple. Some children gradually learn that acceptance isn't freely given. It's connected to behaving correctly, explaining themselves correctly, avoiding mistakes, meeting expectations. Love begins to feel conditional. Approval begins to feel earned, not guaranteed. When experiences like these repeat over years, something subtle can happen. The child doesn't simply become careful, they become responsible for other people's interpretations. As adults, that responsibility often survives long after the original environment disappears. Nobody may actually be questioning them anymore. Yet their nervous system continues preparing an answer before the question has even finished. Pete Walker describes something similar in his work on complex trauma. He explains how people exposed to chronically unpredictable emotional environments often become exceptionally skilled at anticipating reactions before they happen. Not because they're manipulative. Because prediction once created safety. When you never know what will upset someone, you start explaining everything, just in case. This is where over-explaining becomes more than a communication habit. It becomes a protective adaptation. What's striking is that many people don't recognize it as protection. It simply feels like being polite, or making sure everyone has enough context, or preventing unnecessary confusion. And those explanations may genuinely help sometimes. That's what makes the pattern so convincing. Protective behaviors usually survive because they work often enough to justify repeating them. The explanation reduces uncertainty. The uncertainty decreases anxiety. The brain remembers the relief. And slowly, the behavior becomes automatic, not because every conversation is dangerous, but because enough conversations once were. What makes this pattern difficult is how ordinary it can look. Nobody notices the fear hiding inside a well-organized explanation. Even the person speaking may not notice it. They only notice the relief that comes after finally saying enough, or at least what feels like enough. The strange part is, for someone caught in this cycle, enough rarely lasts very long. Because if protection is the goal, there is always one more detail that might prevent the next misunderstanding. And that's exactly where the cycle quietly begins to feed itself. If you ask someone why they over-explain, they'll often give a practical answer. I just don't want people to misunderstand me. That sounds reasonable. In fact, sometimes it is. Misunderstandings create real problems. They strain relationships, complicate work, damage trust. So taking an extra moment to clarify yourself isn't automatically unhealthy. The interesting question isn't whether someone explains. It's why they feel they have to explain so much. Because the length of an explanation doesn't always reflect the complexity of the situation. Sometimes it reflects the complexity of an expectation. And expectations are rarely built in the present moment alone. Imagine someone receives a short text from a friend. Can we talk later? Nothing else. No context. For one person, it's simply a scheduling message. For another, it instantly becomes an investigation. Did I say something wrong? Are they upset? Did I forget something? The conversation hasn't even happened yet. Yet dozens of possible outcomes have already appeared in the mind. Psychologists sometimes describe this as anticipatory processing. Instead of responding to what's happening now, the brain begins responding to what it predicts could happen next. That prediction doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from memory. Not necessarily conscious memory, but emotional memory. Daniel Siegel's work on interpersonal neurobiology suggests that our brains are constantly using previous experiences to predict present situations. Long before we consciously evaluate what's happening, the nervous system has already begun asking a different question. Have I been here before? If the answer feels like yes, the body often prepares for the same outcome, even when the circumstances are different. That's why two people can experience the exact same conversation, yet leave with completely different emotional experiences. One heard curiosity, the other heard potential criticism. The words were identical, the expectations weren't. This is one reason over-explaining can feel almost impossible to interrupt. Because by the time someone begins speaking, their brain isn't responding only to the current listener. It's responding to listeners from years ago. Teachers who assumed the worst. Parents who demanded constant justification. Partners who questioned every decision. Managers who interpreted mistakes as character flaws. Those experiences don't remain neatly stored in the past. They gradually become reference points. The present gets filtered through them. Bessel van der Kolk has written extensively about how trauma changes prediction, not simply memory. In The Body Keeps the Score, he argues that traumatic experiences often leave the nervous system preparing for future danger long after the original danger has disappeared. That's an important distinction. Trauma isn't only about remembering painful events, it's also about expecting them to happen again, even when there's little evidence they will. Overexplaining often reflects this shift. The explanation isn't only for today's conversation, it's for yesterday's consequences. The mind quietly asks, what if this person reacts the same way? And just like that, a simple interaction becomes emotionally crowded. This helps explain another curious pattern. Many people who overexplain don't do it equally with everyone. Around trusted friends, their answers become shorter, more relaxed, more spontaneous. Around authority figures or emotionally unpredictable people, the explanations suddenly grow. More details, more qualifications, more apologies. Sometimes even apologies for things that haven't happened. That difference tells us something important. If overexplaining were simply a personality trait, it would appear consistently. Instead, it often changes depending on how safe someone feels. Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory offers another perspective here. His work suggests that the nervous system is constantly evaluating cues of safety and danger, not consciously. Automatically, this process, which he calls neuroception, happens beneath awareness. A calm facial expression, a warm tone of voice, a patient pause. These subtle signals tell the nervous system, you're probably safe here. When those signals are missing, the body often shifts toward protection before the conscious mind understands why. Protection doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like talking, explaining, clarifying, repeating, trying one more sentence, just to make sure. That's what makes over-explaining so deceptive. It rarely resembles fear. It resembles responsibility. And because responsibility is usually rewarded, the behavior becomes even harder to question. The irony is difficult to miss. The more someone fears being misunderstood, the more information they provide. But after a certain point, more information doesn't always create more clarity. Sometimes it creates uncertainty. The listener starts wondering why such a simple question required such a detailed defense. Without realizing it, the attempt to avoid suspicion can accidentally create it. This doesn't happen because the explanation is dishonest. It happens because communication depends on proportion. When explanations become significantly larger than the situation requires, people naturally search for a reason. That realization can become painfully frustrating. Someone spends 5 minutes trying to sound trustworthy, only to leave feeling less understood than before, which often reinforces the original fear. Next time, I need to explain even better. The cycle tightens, not because the strategy completely fails, but because it succeeds just often enough to keep feeling necessary. Perhaps that's one of the most overlooked aspects of human behavior. We don't always repeat habits because they're healthy. Sometimes we repeat them because, at one point in life, they genuinely kept us emotionally safe. And when the nervous system learns that lesson deeply enough, it doesn't ask whether life has changed. It simply continues protecting the version of us that once needed protection. There's a quiet assumption hiding underneath over-explaining. An assumption so familiar that many people never notice they're making it. It sounds something like this: if I explain myself well enough, I'll finally be understood. On the surface, that seems perfectly reasonable. Clear communication matters. Context matters. Intent matters. But human relationships have never depended on information alone. they also depend on interpretation. And interpretation belongs to the listener as much as the speaker. That's the part overexplaining quietly struggles to accept. Because if every misunderstanding feels like a personal failure, then every conversation starts carrying an impossible responsibility. Not only must you speak honestly, you must also manage how another person receives your honesty. Those are two very different jobs. And only one of them is actually yours. Carl Rogers believed that psychologically healthy relationships are built on something deeper than perfect communication. They're built on an atmosphere where people don't constantly have to earn acceptance through flawless performance. His idea of unconditional positive regard wasn't about ignoring mistakes. It was about creating relationships where human imperfection doesn't immediately threaten belonging. That's an important contrast. Someone who has spent years believing they must constantly justify themselves often enters conversations assuming acceptance is fragile. If one sentence comes out wrong, everything might collapse. So they add another explanation, then another, then another. Eventually, the explanation stops serving communication. It starts serving reassurance. But reassurance behaves differently from understanding. Understanding has a stopping point. Reassurance usually doesn't. Think about the last time you worried whether someone misunderstood you. You probably replayed the conversation afterward. Maybe you remembered another detail you should have mentioned, another sentence you could have added, another way to make your intentions clearer. Notice what happened. The conversation ended. But your mind didn't. It kept searching for the perfect version, not because perfection exists, because certainty feels comforting. Albert Ellis, whose work laid the foundation for rational emotive behavior therapy, argued that emotional distress is often intensified not only by events themselves, but by the rigid beliefs we attach to them. One belief might sound like this: everyone must understand me correctly. Another: if someone misunderstands me, something has gone terribly wrong. When beliefs become absolute, every misunderstanding feels catastrophic. But life rarely works that way. Even healthy relationships contain moments of confusion. Even emotionally mature people occasionally misread each other. Misunderstanding isn't always evidence that communication failed. Sometimes it's simply evidence that two different people experienced the same moment differently. That realization changes something important. It shifts the goal. Instead of trying to eliminate every possible misunderstanding, the goal becomes communicating honestly enough that another person has the opportunity to understand. After that, some uncertainty has to remain, not because communication is unimportant, because relationships involve two nervous systems, two histories, two sets of assumptions. No amount of explanation can completely control that. This is where another subtle contradiction appears. People who over-explain often believe they're creating connection, yet constant self-justification can quietly interfere with the very closeness they're hoping to protect. Real connection doesn't grow because every sentence is perfectly defended. It grows because both people gradually learn that misunderstanding can happen without immediately becoming rejection. That's a very different emotional experience. Kristin Neff's work on self-compassion offers another useful perspective. She argues that many people respond to their own imperfections with a level of criticism they would never direct toward someone they care about. If that's true, then over-explaining sometimes becomes an attempt to avoid triggering that inner critic. The explanation isn't only directed outward. Part of it is directed inward, trying to convince yourself, see, I wasn't wrong. I had a good reason. I wasn't being careless. The habit begins as protection from other people's judgment. Over time, it can quietly become protection from your own. What makes this pattern so persistent is that it often disguises itself as responsibility. and responsibility is usually admired. Few people are criticized for trying to be clear, which means the emotional engine underneath the behavior can remain invisible for years, not because it's hidden intentionally. Because the behavior still looks useful. Sometimes it is useful. That's worth acknowledging. There are situations where detailed explanations genuinely matter. Complex decisions. Sensitive conversations. Repairing trust after a mistake. Psychology rarely deals in absolutes. The goal isn't to explain less no matter what. It's to notice the difference between explaining because the situation needs clarity and explaining because your nervous system is asking for certainty. Those aren't always the same thing. One responds to the present. The other responds to the past. And perhaps that's the quiet realization waiting underneath this entire pattern. Overexplaining isn't necessarily a sign that someone has more to say. Sometimes it's a sign that somewhere along the way, they learned that being understood was something they had to earn. Not once, every single time. The difficult part is that life rarely offers absolute certainty. Someone may still misunderstand you. Someone may still disagree. Someone may even assume something unfair. No explanation can completely prevent that. And strangely, recognizing that limitation isn't pessimistic, it's freeing. Because the moment understanding no longer depends on saying everything perfectly, conversation begins to feel less like self-defense, and more like what it was always meant to be. A meeting between two imperfect human beings, doing their best to understand one another. Sometimes that understanding arrives immediately. Sometimes it doesn't. But neither outcome determines your worth.